Hello and good morning. You're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Iran and Israel say they will pause strikes but warn of retaliation if a ceasefire is breached again. Ukraine strikes Russia and Moscow strikes civilian town of Zaporizhzhia, killing 2 and injuring more. And at least 35 dead after major earthquake strikes southern Philippines. First this morning, Iran and Israel say they have halted attacks against each other after a sharp escalation raised fears of a wider conflict. The pause followed calls from US President Donald Trump, although both sides are warning they could resume military action if the other strikes again.
Iran and Israel have announced a halt to attacks following nearly 24 hours of direct military confrontation. Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters said on Monday that it was suspending strikes against Israel after what it described as a response to Israeli military actions in Lebanon. The statement warned that any further Israeli attacks would trigger a much stronger reaction. Israeli media, citing a senior official, reported that Israel also suspended its strikes on Iran at the request of US President Donald Trump. However, the official said Israel would continue high-intensity operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and could expand strikes if attacks on Israeli territory continue. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the fighting with Iran was currently on hold, but warned that Israel would retaliate if Iran launched further attacks.
After Iran attacked Israel, I instructed the IDF to strike military and economic targets throughout Iran. We did that as well. At the moment, the fire has ceased, because after we struck the terrorist regime in Tehran, it stopped attacking us. If the terrorist regime makes the mistake of attacking us again, we will respond with force. Because Israel has the full right to self-defense, and we exercise it whenever necessary. I say this to you, dear citizens of Israel, just as I say it with appreciation and respect in my good conversations with my friend, President Trump.
The latest crisis began on Sunday evening when Iran launched ballistic missiles at northern Israel, saying the attack was retaliation for Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon. Iran carried out further strikes on Monday, targeting military sites and industries. Israel responded with airstrikes on military targets in Iran, including air defense systems, saying the operation was aimed at reducing threats to Israeli security. The exchange marked the most serious direct confrontation between the two countries since a ceasefire was reached in April.
Following on from that, let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe. And we stick with the first main story, which is also on the New York Times today, stating that Israel halts Iran strikes after Trump claims progress toward nuclear talks, officials say. So as you just heard in that particular report, Iran and Israel say they will halt attacks on each other after the two countries exchanged fire for the first time since the April ceasefire. Now, Israel's Prime Minister, which you just saw in that clip, said on Monday that the country was going to hold fire for the moment, but stressed that the struggle against Iran and Hezbollah was not finished. So that came after hours after Iran's armed forces said that it had stopped operations following the delivery of a painful response to Israel, and also said that it promised more severe crushing measures if Israel carried out more strikes, including in Lebanon, where Israeli forces are fighting the Iran-backed group Hezbollah. And just a reminder that Tehran launched missiles on Israel on Sunday, and in retaliation, Israel also launched a number of strikes on Beirut. So it's back and forth, but thankfully they've now decided to halt attacks while negotiations between the US and Iran continue. And in a call to the BBC, actually US President Donald Trump denied that Netanyahu had defied his wishes by launching strikes, because when Iran did attack northern part of Israel, the US said to Israel not to respond. However, Benjamin Netanyahu's military did strike Beirut in response to that particular attack. But now Donald Trump has said, no, they had already gone. They were already on their way. It's what he's referring to when he says that about Israel's striking attempts over to Lebanon. But we'll provide you with more information later on in the program to really delve into the depth of that story. Now let's move over to our next story, which is on the BBC website today, and that's in relation to what happened over in the Philippines, because we have an update when it comes to the death toll, because at least 35 people have died after a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck off the coast of the Mindanao Island in the southern Philippines. And that's what officials say. We will now go to some pictures that just show the impact of what this devastation actually now looks like the day after. Now, the quake actually hit the Philippines at around 7:37 local time, which is Monday, 3:37 a.m. Baku time. And that was triggering a tsunami alert in the Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, and Australia. And if you can just see on your screens there just how some of these buildings were very much toppled over and the dangers that caused, which is no wonder why at least 35 people at the moment have been killed by this earthquake. Now, the warnings were cancelled, the tsunami warnings were cancelled or downgraded hours later, but videos and images showed buildings collapsing, including a clip of a restaurant reduced to rubble, and landslides have also been recorded in some of the areas. Officials in the Philippines have said that at least 134 have been injured and some 10,000 families have been displaced. Authorities gave an earlier death toll of 32 people, with 12 people reported missing. And it's the second biggest island. So the Mindanao island is the second biggest in the Philippines, both in size and in population, and is home to around 26 million people. So the casualty numbers still need to be confirmed and verified, but we will provide you with more information in relation to that. But the president of Philippines, Fernand Marcos Jr., said that in a statement that agencies were coordinating their disaster response. In one video posted by a primary school, we also saw that dozens of students were seen bending down and lowering down when the earthquake happened, and unfortunately one of the congregated roofs collapsed. Thankfully, no students were injured, but it just showed the impact of what that was like for a number of students and people and residents in and around that area. Now, the president has said that all classes and all schools have been cancelled during this time just because of the danger that the earthquake has brought along with the tremors, but we'll provide you with more information as we get it if that death toll does indeed rise. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website in relation to Nigeria. And it says, bandits in northwest Nigeria abduct villagers they invited to discuss peace talks. Now, yesterday, if you remember, we actually had good news, because those who were kidnapped in March, which was at a school, were returned. At least 400 kidnapped children and people and teachers were returned successfully after the military got involved. Unfortunately, now this has happened, and what we currently know is armed bandits in northwest Nigeria abducted dozens of villagers whom they actually invited to a meeting about a potential peace negotiations, authorities and residents said on Monday, highlighting the region's worsening security. Now, according to local police, 39 people were taken on Sunday during a meeting in the forest near Magamin Didi village, but some residents and officials believe that number of those who were taken could actually be a lot higher and could reach up to 50 people in total. Now, it's believed that the victims were meeting the relatives of the bandit leader in hope of bringing peace and easing restrictions imposed on the community. While the meeting was going on, the bandit kingpin allegedly arrived at the location with members of his gang and forcefully abducted 39 members of the group to an unknown destination, is what a police spokesman said in a statement on Monday. Now, the chair of the Maridun local government told a local newspaper that authorities in the state were not in support of reconciliation with bandits. And according to the chair, the bandits had recently blocked all roads leading to the community market to show their anger over the persistent killing of members of their security operatives. But we'll hopefully provide you with more information and to find out whether or not they're able to bring those who have been abducted back home to safety. But as I've mentioned previously before, there's a number of abductions and kidnappings in Nigeria, within the northern part of Nigeria. So, and it's something that the government there is trying to tackle. But it's just unfortunate that we've now had another story of another incident exactly like this happen again. Okay, now we move over to what is now going to be kicking off, and it's going to be all over the place. We go to ESPN because of the World Cup. Starts today, well, starts on the 11th. We are the 9th, so we have one more day. And the headline reads, World Cup's new rules explained, VAR for corners, no goal kick timeouts, and red card for covering your mouth. So I'm just going to go through the rules. And there is a video that we are going to bring up very shortly that kind of describes this, but I'm going to read this out to you. So it's a host of VAR changes that the 2026 World Cup will feature a hefty number of rule changes, new responsibilities for video assistant referees, new red card offences, and a number of initiatives to speed up the game will be put into effect. So what are the rules? And as you can see there on that video, it's going to come up. I'm actually going to explain it now. So the video assistant referee VAR will now be allowed to review a number of things, including VAR also to check fouls before set pieces, labelled a clarification. This adaptation will extend the window for assessing goal penalties or send-offs that follow the taking of a set piece. Red cards for covering mouths and leaving the field, which you've just seen on the screen. 2 notorious incidents happened this year which have led directly to those red card offences. Measures to stop tactical timeout. So one growing source of frustration within the game is persistent tactical timeout, where the treatment of an apparent injury is used as a chance for coaches to relay instructions to players. So that will also be stopped. And a further and final rule tweak requires that any player being substituted may leave the field of play within 10 seconds or their number being raised. If they take any longer, their replacement player will be kept on the field for a further minute. And lastly, just to add, the referee countdowns to help speed up goal kicks has also expanded to the World Cup to include throw-ins. In both cases, referees can, with their hand, signal a 5-second countdown to dawdling players. If the count reaches 0, then the throw-in will be granted to the opposition, or in the case of a goal kick, a corner will be awarded to the opponent instead. So quite a few rules there, but that's all to help the game really get a move on, not be delayed, and also for it to be fair for both teams playing. So I'm sure the players and those watching will appreciate these new rules. Whether or not and how they will be administered is still something that we'll wait to see. But as we prepare for the World Cup, at least these new rules will hopefully help each game to really do what it needs to do and to usher whoever is the best at that game when it begins on the 11th of June. Well, that's your morning press headlines for now. Now I'm going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. And we head first over to Europe because the war in Ukraine continues to bring new attacks, diplomatic signals and pressure on Russia's economy. In Zaporizhzhia, a drone strike has hit a civilian area, while Kyiv and its European partners are looking for new ways to raise the costs of Moscow's war. Here's more.
A Russian drone attack on Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhzhia has killed 2 people and wounded 23 others, according to regional governor Ivan Fedorov. The strike hit near a bus station, damaging vehicles, shops and nearby structures. Forensic teams worked at the scene, where authorities also recovered a damaged object believed to be part of a drone. The attack came as Ukraine intensified strikes on oil facilities in Russia and Russian-occupied Crimea, part of Kiev's campaign to raise the economic cost of Moscow's war. Russian authorities have reported fuel supply problems in several southern regions following the strikes. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov acknowledged certain problems, but said measures were being taken, while blaming panic buying. Diplomatic contacts also remain on the agenda. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Roman Abramovich had acted as a go-between for messages between Kiev and Moscow. At the same time, the European Union is preparing a new round of sanctions against Russia. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the proposed measures include 80 new listings targeting Russia's military-industrial complex, human rights violators and propagandists.
A French military fighter jet shot down a drone that entered the airspace of NATO member Latvia from Russia on Monday. Latvian Prime Minister said that they were working together with Ukraine on drone defense technologies, but did not say who launched the drone. Some drones have entered the airspace of Finland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. And its defense minister said no one was injured and there was no damage done. Thousands of people have rallied in Albania's capital and along its southern coast against a luxury resort planned by US envoy and US President Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, warning it could damage a protected wetland. Protesters say the site is a vital habitat for flamingos, seals and nesting sea turtles. The pink bird has become the symbol of the campaign, with demonstrators carrying inflatable signs reading Flamingo Revolution. Its Prime Minister has defended the development and said they will go ahead with the plans.
While when it comes to the project that has created all this worldwide outrage, it is about a private property. It is not about a land that is public and the Albanian government is giving by selling out the country. It's a private property. It's an expression of interest based on a private deal between private parties in which the Albanian government has nothing to do.
Now over to the UK, and its Prime Minister has stepped up pressure on major tech firms over online child safety. The government is warning companies and wants them to act quickly or face new legislation. Our correspondent reports from Manchester.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer has given tech giants Apple and Google a 3-month deadline to introduce software that blocks explicit images on children's phones or face new laws forcing them to do so. Speaking at London Tech Week, Starmer said companies must activate nudity detection systems or similar tools across smartphones and tablets to prevent minors from creating, sending or receiving sexually explicit images unless verified as adults. He warned that if firms fail to comply by September, the government will bring forward legislation to make these protections mandatory on all devices sold in the UK. The Prime Minister said too many have accepted their idea that nothing can be done to stop children sharing explicit content, calling that view unacceptable. He insisted technology must adapt to society, not the other way around, and said online predators must be stopped from exploiting young people through their devices. The move follows growing political pressure over child safety online, including the resignation of former Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips, who accused the government of delaying stronger action to prevent children creating and sharing explicit images of themselves. The government says it wants the UK to become the first country to effectively block children from taking, sending or viewing nude images on phones. The companies have already introduced limited tools, such as a warning system for sensitive content, but ministers argue these are not strong enough because they can often be bypassed. Zaina Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
At least 11 people have died after a migrant boat capsized in waters off Malta. Charity group Sea-Watch said on Monday, while around 50 more were rescued at sea by a fishing vessel in the area. According to the Italian Coast Guard, the boat left the Libyan coast carrying around 60 people and sank about 45 nautical miles southeast of Malta. Rescue teams covered 10 bodies. Sea-Watch said that the number of missing people is still not clear. The Italian Coast Guard said it immediately sent a patrol vessel to the area. The European Union has imposed sanctions on 2 Iranian individuals and a unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, accusing them of threatening maritime freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. EU Foreign Policy Chief said member states in Brussels approved the measures under a new sanctions regime focused on protecting freedom of navigation, adding that further action could follow if needed. Kaja Kallas made these remarks to reporters at the meeting of EU defence ministers in Cyprus.
Freedom of navigation is under heavy pressure globally, as we see most acutely in the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran effectively closed the strait, and its drones continue to threaten the maritime traffic. Ministers were clear today that Iran's actions are unacceptable. In response, EU member states in Brussels today approved sanctions against the Iranian individuals and entities involved in disrupting the transit through the Strait of Hormuz. This is the first time EU has applied its new freedom of navigation sanctions regime, and where necessary will apply it again.
The United Nations says the closure of Gaza's main entry points is worsening the humanitarian situation and is urging Israel to reopen them without delay. UN officials stress that the organization does not accept the shutdown of crossings by Israel and continues to call for unrestricted aid access.
OCHA reports that following missile attacks towards Israel since last night, the Israeli authorities closed the Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salam crossing today, which has been the only crossing into Gaza that had been operational for cargo over the past 2 weeks. However, humanitarians were allowed to collect cargo from the Palestinian side of the crossing. Israeli authorities also closed Rafah crossing. OCHA stressed that people in the Gaza Strip rely on a steady flow of humanitarian and commercial goods from outside. The UN and our humanitarian partners work hard to maintain a sustained and predictable flow of supplies despite restrictions. Such efforts cannot be sustained if crossings remain closed. Against this backdrop, civilians and civilian infrastructure continue to be exposed to Israeli airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire, resulting in reported casualties and damage. Under international humanitarian law, civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected.
Now over to East Asia, and a powerful earthquake has left a trail of destruction across the southern Philippines, disrupting schools, transport and daily life for thousands. Rescue teams are racing to assess the full scale of the disaster as communities begin the recovery effort.
Rescue and recovery operations are continuing in the southern Philippines after a powerful earthquake struck off the coast of Sarangani province, killing at least 37 people and injuring more than 100 others. The magnitude 7.8 quake triggered landslides, damaged buildings and disrupted transport links across parts of Mindanao, with General Santos among the worst affected areas. Homes were left tilted and buildings suffered collapsed walls and roofs as emergency crews continued searching for missing people. Authorities say the victims were killed by falling debris, structural collapses and landslides caused by the strong shaking. The earthquake struck shortly after schools reopened following the summer break, affecting thousands of educational facilities across several regions. In some areas, students and teachers were forced to evacuate classrooms as the tremor hit. Transport and public services were also disrupted. Operations at General Santos International Airport were temporarily suspended for safety inspections, while several domestic flights were cancelled. The offshore quake prompted tsunami warnings in the Philippines, Japan and Indonesia. Although tsunami waves were recorded, officials said they were too small to cause significant damage, and all warnings have since been lifted. Tremors were felt across large parts of the southern Philippines and in neighbouring Indonesia, highlighting the regional impact of one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the country in recent years. The disaster comes less than a year after a series of deadly earthquakes struck the Philippines, underscoring the country's vulnerability to seismic activity along the Pacific Ring of Fire.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in North Korea for his first visit to the country in 7 years, holding talks with leader Kim Jong-un aimed at strengthening bilateral ties and expanding strategic cooperation. Xi called for closer coordination between Beijing and Pyongyang as the two leaders pledged to strengthen bilateral ties. The talks came as China seeks to reinforce its influence in North Korea amid its growing partnership with Russia, which has deepened through the military and economic cooperation in recent years. The global airline industry is facing renewed pressure from rising fuel costs, aircraft shortages and ongoing engine problems as airlines grapple with the fallout from the conflict involving Iran. The IATA has nearly halved its forecast for global airline net profit this year, cutting its estimate from $41 billion to $23 billion, despite expectations that industry revenues will exceed a record $1.1 trillion in total. The company says higher jet fuel prices and restrictions on key air routes in the Gulf are increasing operating costs, forcing carriers to fly longer routes and consume fuel more.
Unfortunately, I think there will be some carriers that will find this high fuel price very difficult to cope with. They won't be able to recover the increase in costs because of their weak commercial position. And it's going to be difficult to see how, in an environment like that, all of the airlines that are in that sort of scenario, weak balance sheet, weak financial performance, and where the competitive position is not very strong, I think they are going to struggle.
Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional stories and I'll be joined by a guest to go through some of those key headlines. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's head over to the region and we head first to Turkey because Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Venezuela's interim President Delcy Rodriguez held talks in Istanbul on Monday. Rodriguez visited Istanbul while returning from a visit to India, marking the first meeting between the two sides. No immediate details about the discussions were released. Rodriguez, who previously served as vice president, has been seeking to attract investment in Venezuela's oil and mining sectors as she works to stabilize the country following the capture of President Nicolas Maduro by US forces. Now we're going to take a look at the reactions to Armenia's election results after polling results confirmed Pashinyan's victory. Congratulations poured in from across the region and Europe. The messages highlighted not only support for Pashinyan's leadership, but also growing expectations about Armenia's future ties with the EU.
Regional leaders were among the first to congratulate Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan as vote counting continued following Sunday's parliamentary elections. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze welcomed the result and said he looks forward to strengthening strategic ties between Georgia and Armenia. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev also congratulated Pashinyan, citing preliminary assessments by international observers that the vote was conducted openly and in accordance with electoral laws. Among European leaders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the result was also a victory for Armenia's sovereignty and independence. French President Emmanuel Macron said Pashinyan's victory would strengthen momentum toward closer ties with Europe. Moldovan President Maya Sandu and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez were also among the leaders sending congratulatory messages. Senior European Union officials likewise welcomed the result. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU deeply values its partnership with a democratic Armenia that is drawing ever closer to Europe, adding that Armenia can count on the bloc's support. European Council President Antonio Costa and European Parliament President Roberta Metsola also congratulated Pashinyan, underscoring continued European engagement with Armenia following the closely watched vote.
Staying on this topic, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party secured in total 49.8% of the vote, with the Strong Armenia Alliance coming in second place with 23.2%. The Armenia Alliance was third with 9.9% as well. However, even though, as you saw there, Pashinyan was full of jubilation and a number of congratulations were sent to him, not everyone was thrilled. And later that day, the Armenia Alliance said it would challenge the results of the parliamentary elections. Here now to discuss this and and what that really means is Nargis Mammadova, expert in international relations at Caspia Center. Welcome this morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Well, my first question in relation to this, we know that the Armenian elections happened on Sunday. We got the final result on Monday morning. We actually announced that on the program as well. There's loads of congratulations. Obviously, Pashinyan is very happy about this, but not everyone is. And in particular, Robert Karahan, Armenia's second president and leader of the alliance, believes that the elections were held in the middle of widespread pressure, arrests of opposition figures, etc. Do you think his grounds for this challenge is adequate? And what will this mean for Pashinyan and his party?
Well, Armenian nation made its choice, and their choice is Pashinyan. Their choice is Pashinyan for the upcoming 4 years. And I think that the figures like Kachurian or Samvel Karapitan or opposition, of course now they will tell everything like the falsification of the elections, that something going wrong during the election process, that something is wrong after elections. And maybe the one country who is not satisfied with the result is Russia. And of course, each position that has some connection with Russia is also very unpleased with the results of the elections. So even I will tell you a very fun fact that during the election times, it was like on Sunday, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, where the elections, it's the time when the elections are on their high level, on their high temp, I will say. So the Russian Telegram channels and Russian media outlets, they posted news and some kind of propaganda type news like Pashinyan is losing, like the opposition will win, and etc. So even before the results, they gave such perspective. But the reality is different. The reality is that Pashinyan and his party won again. Will it happen again in the next elections? After 4 years? I don't know exactly, because the PR team of Pashinyan and the Pashinyan team will need to work really hard to strengthen the trust between his party and nation.
I see. Well, just on that, yesterday we also spoke about his win, but there was a harder battle because of Pashinyan constitutionally. He has the votes to run a government, but not for constitutional change, which is still very key to, his overall vision and aim for Armenia. What will this mean in the long term, and how might that affect the peace process with Azerbaijan?
Well, if you go to some, let's say, anti-Azerbaijani media outlets, which is in Russia and in Armenia, even in France, all in their, let's say, interviews with the orderly citizens of Armenia, they put the question of Azerbaijan, and they specifically choose people who are against the peace process to give the vision that yes, Armenia is not going to peace with Azerbaijan, while we know that the the official narrative of Pashinyan and his government and his party is go to peace process because he signed the Washington documents last summer. He put his sign. So he should, of course, go to each factor, each element of this agreement, and of course, if there is a need for referendum, and there is a need for referendum, he needs to do it. You need to figure out how to deal with this referendum, because in the constitution of Armenia there is a specific topics that triggers Azerbaijan fair enough, I think, and of course I think that this question will be more discussed in Armenia in upcoming months than the results of elections, because I think that the opposition, they not disappear, they are still opposition. So they will put, let's say, some bad manners on this topic. They will try to stop this process. They will try to how to say, put everything upside down in this question, because they're opposition.
Yes, of course. Well, we know the opposition is always against whichever person is in power, especially if they're not holding that particular baton. But just on that, could you say it's fair to say that Russia's influence has actually impacted the elections? And even though they haven't been able to change who has actually been able to govern Armenia, it has been able to stall attempts when it comes to legislative change. And do you think that is good enough, just because of how Armenia's seats will be distributed? And it looks like the constitution changing of legislation will definitely be an issue for Pashinyan. Could Russia say that actually it's had some form of wielding effect in that?
Well, first of all, let's start with this, that now the relations between Armenia and Russia are not the best one. I think that even for the last 4 years, these moments, I mean, pre-election time and right now, the relations between Armenia and Russia may be the toughest one during the last years. So Pashinyan's team first need to understand how to figure out how to speak with Russia, because you cannot close your eyes and say that there is no Russia. No. Russia, there are a lot of people in Armenia living under the condition of the dual citizenship. They are the citizenship of Armenia, and they're at the same time the citizen of Russia. So, and they are also very high level business elite people in Armenia, which is also, guess what, related to Russia. And of course they have influence, at least they have business influence and the business interest in Armenia, and they know how to push forward their interest in the business sphere, okay? The second one is the political pressure. I think that Russia will find a new ways how to push to Armenia. We know all the sanctions they put on the products of Armenia, and I think that due to that the Russia now is angry with Armenia, because the plan of Russia to make a win for the opposition is not actual now, okay? The election has ended. And right now, I think that the behavior of Russia will be how to stop Pashinyan, how to manipulate with him, how to still strengthen the influence of Russia in Armenia. How they will do it? Of course, they will speak. I will say they not speak, but they will use media, they will use Telegram channels, they will use opposition again. They can use business elite, which is connected with Russian business elite or even with Kremlin. And of course, they will use, some trigger topic for the Armenian nation. So they will put forward again, so-called Karabakh conflict, Karabakh topic, which is ended. We are on the peace process, and it's really unfair to countries that is not even a facilitator right now. I mean, Russia, to put forward the topic which is not under consideration right now. It is doing, I will say it fakely, it's doing under some interest in Kremlin, we understand it, but it's the responsibility of Pashinyan not to allow for Russia to do it.
I see. And just very quickly, because we're just having to come to an end, we can't forget the impact that Armenia wants to, be aligned more with the West, be aligned more with the EU. How will Pashinyan be able to do a juggling act between being pulled in one direction, between Russia, and being pulled in another direction between the EU, and obviously his ascension into that particular bloc? What do you think Pashinyan will be focusing on in the next 100 days of his new term?
It's a very interesting question because, even experts are splitting the ideas over it. I will say that, first of all, why it triggers so much? Because Russia was a comfort zone of Armenia. Whatever happens in Armenia, bad or good, it's kind of due to history and due to this traditional approach in the foreign policy of Armenia, it's kind of linked with Russia. Each come and goes, each even problem, it's kind of linked with Russia. So now the Pashinyan wants to change it completely, to go out of out of Armenia's comfort zone in foreign politics and turn to EU. First of all, it will not happen like this. It will not happen very fast. It will happen like step by step. And the role of Russia in this topic is to stop Armenia, because if Armenia goes to EU, even not goes to EU, okay, let's pretend starting the path of going towards to EU, it's a huge problem for Russia, because Russia will lose its influence in Armenia. Armenia, it's a sphere of interest for Russia.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's something that we'll be paying close attention to, as well as what happens in relation to the peace process here in Azerbaijan. So thank you so much for joining me on the program, Mrs. Mamadova. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Right, we now turn over to Turkey, because the foreign ministers of Turkey, Azerbaijan and Georgia have held trilateral talks in Istanbul, reaffirming their commitment to regional cooperation and signing a joint document known as the Istanbul Declaration. The meeting comes at a time of heightened geopolitical uncertainty in the South Caucasus, along with mounting interest in regional transport and energy corridors. Our correspondent Adam Marrow brings us the details.
Turkey, Azerbaijan and Georgia have reaffirmed their strategic partnership following a trilateral meeting on Monday between their respective foreign ministers in Istanbul. At the meeting, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan hosted his Azerbaijani and Georgian counterparts Ceyhun Bayramov and Maka Bachvarishvili. It was the 10th such meeting in the trilateral format, which was first launched in 2012 with the aim of enhancing political, economic and security cooperation between the three countries. Following the talks, the three ministers signed the Istanbul Declaration, a joint statement outlining their shared priorities and vision for regional cooperation. According to the declaration, the three countries reaffirmed their commitment to each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and internationally recognized borders. The document also stresses the importance of peace, stability, and prosperity in the South Caucasus and highlights the role of trilateral cooperation in addressing common regional and global challenges. During the talks, the ministers discussed regional security, economic integration, energy cooperation, and transportation links. According to diplomatic sources, the closed-door talks reportedly laid particular emphasis on key east-west connectivity projects involving all three countries. The trilateral framework has become increasingly important as the emerging Middle Corridor comes into focus as an alternative trade route linking Europe with Central Asia and China. The three countries are already linked via several strategic projects, including the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway, the Southern Gas Corridor, and a range of energy and transport infrastructure networks. Monday's meeting in Istanbul comes amid significant geopolitical change in South Caucasus, where regional governments hope to capitalize on growing demand for alternative energy routes and secure transport corridors. This is Adam Marrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now we move over to Georgia, where Georgians may lose their visa-free access to Europe. Brussels has activated a formal suspension mechanism against Georgia and called Georgian officials to a dialogue meeting on the 11th of June. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
Millions of Georgian citizens could lose the right to travel to Europe without a visa, and the clock is ticking. The meeting on June 11 is taking place under the suspension mechanism Brussels activated against Georgia in March, a decision that already stripped holders of Georgian diplomatic service and official passports of their travel rights until March 2027. The Commission also introduced enhanced screening of all Georgian citizens at EU borders, with checks running across European databases, including the Visa Information System, the Schengen Information System, and the Entry-Exit System rolled out across the EU last October. The latest EU report under the mechanism makes clear why Brussels is alarmed. Georgia has fulfilled almost none of its recommendations. The Commission points to Tbilisi granting visa-free access to Chinese citizens in 2024, maintaining arrangements with 26 countries whose nationals need visas to enter the EU, and allowing entry to citizens of 17 others solely on the basis of Gulf Cooperation Council permits. Brussels called this backsliding systematic and deliberate. The Georgian government sees it differently. Parliament Speaker Shalva Papashvili described the June 11 meeting as technical rather than political and accused Brussels of imposing conditions that go beyond visa liberalization criteria and infringe on Georgian sovereignty. He pushed back against EU expectations that Georgia join sanctions against Russia and scrap its foreign agents law. But Georgian opposition parties and civil society organizations strongly reject that framing, holding the government itself responsible for the country's deteriorating relationship with the European Union. The road ahead has clear milestones. In December, the Commission publishes its next annual report, and in January 2027, EU member states may vote on whether to maintain or fully suspend visa-free travel for all Georgian citizens, a right that Georgians have held since 2017. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan has raised concern over reports that several women have been arrested in Herat for allegedly failing to follow hijab and dress regulations. Our correspondent Amin Bahis has more from Kabul.
UNAMA has expressed concern over what it describes as multiple arrests and detentions of women in Herat in western Afghanistan. According to the UN's mission, the women were reportedly detained for alleged non-compliance with dress requirements, including hijab regulations. In its statement, UNAMA said these reports raise serious human rights concerns. The mission also reminded the de facto authorities that all people have the right to freedom of movement. It added that women and men are equally entitled to equality before the law. So far, Afghan authorities have not issued any comment on the reported arrests in Herat or on UNAMA's statement. The issue of women's rights and restrictions on women's public life has remained a major concern in Afghanistan, with international organizations repeatedly calling for the protection of basic freedoms. For now, UNAMA says it is concerned about the reported detentions and is urging respect for fundamental rights, including freedom of movement and equal treatment under the law. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Now time for a quick break. When I return, I have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A-News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Iran and Israel say they will pause strikes but warn of retaliation if a ceasefire is breached again. Ukraine strikes Russia and Moscow strikes civilian town of Zaporizhzhia, killing 2 and injuring more. And at least 35 dead after major earthquake strikes southern Philippines. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe. And we head first to Deutsche Welle website and their headline, which reads Trump DOJ to denaturalize 17 US citizens in a rare move. So what does this mean? Well, the Trump administration said it would strip citizenship from people convicted of crimes such as healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and other unlawful conducts. Now, according to the Department of Justice statement, the 17 individuals were born in countries such as Cuba, Haiti, Somalia, China, and India. And the DOJ has accused these particular individuals of covering up their criminal activities, which include what I just read out in relation to a number of fraudulent attempts. Now, these activities during their naturalization process is what the DOJ is actually highlighting in that, because they've said in their statement saying gaining US citizenship is a privilege, and under the steadfast leadership of President Donald Trump, this Department of Justice maintains a zero tolerance policy for the abuse of this process. And now that's what acting General attorney said in a statement, and also added that he mentioned we continue to work around the clock with our interagency partners to make sure US citizenship is granted to those who truly deserve it. Now, we know that the Trump administration also has been going after birthright citizenship, and an executive order signed by President Donald Trump early in his presidency sought to revoke birthright citizenship to Americans born to undocumented parents. Now, Trump's administration is also targeting foreigners who come to the US territory to give birth to a US citizen baby, is what they call it, a phenomenon known as a birth tourism. Now, the US Supreme Court is expected to issue a possible decision by the end of this month to see whether or not it will be able to end automatic birthright citizenship. So we'll definitely keep you updated, because this is very rare for the US to actually go ahead and do this and to revoke those who have been naturalized into the country, and also overturn birthright citizenship as well. So we're just giving you the information as it comes, but a very strange attempt there. But we will definitely make sure that we check in to find out what else is being done over in the US when it comes to their citizenship and birthright for some of its citizens. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the BBC website in relation to what's been happening in the Philippines, because as we now know that at least 35 people have died after a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck off the coast of the Mindanao Island in the southern Philippines. And we have a map that shows exactly where this particular devastation of the earthquake took place that will come up on your screens very shortly. There we go. Now, we know that the earthquake hit at around 7:37 local time in the morning on Monday morning, which is around about 3:30 Baku time. And that's what triggered warnings for alerts for a tsunami in the Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, and Australia. And as you can see here, the Davao area of the Philippines right there at the bottom, and the General Santos area highlighted in red were the main areas that were largely hit. Now, videos and images show buildings collapsing, including a clip of a restaurant which was reduced to rubble. Now, we do have some drone footage that we'll be able to show you, just kind of highlighting this devastation of what the earthquake actually produced once it hit on Monday. Now, landslides were also recorded in some areas, and officials in the Philippines have said that at least 134 people have been injured, with thousands of families displaced. Now, authorities gave an earlier death toll of 32 people, with 12 people reported missing. And Mindanao is the Philippines' second biggest island area, both in size and population, and is home to around 26 million people. So they actually expect that particular figure of 35, which I read out at the beginning of this segment, to rise a lot higher. Now, casualty numbers were still being later verified by the disaster agency team. And the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said in a statement that agencies were coordinating with the disaster response. In one video posted, there was also a primary school that was hit, and a number of students and teachers were there squatting on the ground, on the shaking ground, while making sure they reached for some form of cover as a congregated roof actually fell. Thankfully, there was no injuries, but we could just see the devastation. As you can see here, some of these buildings have been very much dilapidated or on its last legs. As you can see there, a residential building just caved over. Okay. Now let's move over to our leading story this morning. We head to a news website here, and what the headline is Trump warns Netanyahu against renewed Iran war as Iran halt attacks. Now, we now know that Iran and Israel say they will have stopped attacking each other after the two countries exchanged fire for the first time since the April truce. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that his country was holding fire at the moment, but stressed that the struggle against Iran and Hezbollah was not finished. Now, that came hours after Iran's armed forces said that it had stopped operations following a delivery of a painful response to Israel, and also it said it promised more severe crushing measures if Israel carried out more strikes, including in Lebanon, where Israeli forces are fighting the Iran-backed group Hezbollah. And just as a reminder, this all kicked off on Sunday when Tehran launched missiles at northern Israel on Sunday, and in retaliation, Israel also decided to send strikes back to Beirut. It's not until US President Donald Trump got involved and asked Netanyahu to stop and not to retaliate, even though that was too late, because he did speak to the BBC about this and actually said that no, they had already gone in relation to the missiles that had already left Israel over to Beirut. But he's still ongoing with the negotiations between Iran and the US, hoping to come to some form of peaceful agreement. But we have more of that story with this particular report, so let's go to it.
Iran and Israel have announced a halt to attacks following nearly 24 hours of direct military confrontation. Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters said on Monday that it was suspending strikes against Israel after what it described as a response to Israeli military actions in Lebanon. The statement warned that any further Israeli attacks would trigger a much stronger reaction. Israeli media, citing a senior official, reported that Israel also suspended its strikes on Iran at the request of US President Donald Trump. However, the official said Israel would continue high-intensity operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and could expand strikes if attacks on Israeli territory continue. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the fighting with Iran was currently on hold, but warned that Israel would retaliate if Iran launched further attacks.
After Iran attacked Israel, I instructed the IDF to strike military and economic targets throughout Iran. We did that as well. At the moment, the fire has ceased, because after we struck the terrorist regime in Tehran, it stopped attacking us. If the terrorist regime makes the mistake of attacking us again, we will respond with force, because Israel has the full right to self-defense, and we exercise it whenever necessary. I say this to you, dear citizens of Israel, just as I say it with appreciation and respect in my good conversations with my friend, President Trump.
The latest crisis began on Sunday evening when Iran launched ballistic missiles at northern Israel, saying the attack was retaliation for Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon. Iran carried out further strikes on Monday, targeting military sites and industries. Israel responded with airstrikes on military targets in Iran, including air defense systems, saying the operation was aimed at reducing threats to Israeli security. The exchange marked the most serious direct confrontation between the two countries since a ceasefire was reached in April.
Staying on our top story now, I'm now joined by political analyst Tom Gross, here to kind of delve deeper into the prospects and what could come out of a ceasefire or halt in fire between Iran and Israel. Joining me now, so welcome to the program. Thank you, Tom Gross, for joining me.
Good morning.
My first question in this is that things have escalated quite quickly. What position does that put the US in when it comes to negotiations with Iran?
Well, as to quote Donald Trump, he says, I'm the one calling the shots, not Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu or anybody else. He said it 3 times yesterday in an interview with the Financial Times newspaper. He said, I'm the one calling the shots. I've got all the shots. Israel hasn't got the shots. However, viewed from here in Tel Aviv, Trump's position looks very weak. For weeks now, he has been saying we're on the verge of a deal. There's some very good people in Iran. They're reasonable. I'm in touch with them, etc., etc. He looks desperate, Trump, to get a deal for a deal's sake. Now, everybody would prefer peace rather than war. Everyone would prefer a deal. But people in the Middle East, not just in Israel, but in the Arab world, and indeed among most of the Iranian population, they want a good deal, not a deal that would empower this Iranian regime, the same regime which massacred up to 40,000 or more civilians of its own people this past January, and the same regime which just yesterday not only shot ballistic missiles at millions of Israelis, but they also shot missiles at several Arab states yesterday too. So, we don't want a deal that will empower the Iranian regime, and Trump appears to be so desperate to get a deal because he prides himself on being some kind of great deal maker that he's playing into the Iranian regime's hands. That's what it looks like.
Well, that's quite interesting because obviously it's been going on a lot longer than I think most people would have expected, especially as well as the US backing with so much of their military expertise, that this is now coming into just the 100th day, I now believe, which is, approaching the 4-month mark. But in all of this, no one is innocent. The US did attack Iran first, Israel and the US. It was a joint attack on Iran and Lebanon with many casualties, both innocent, however you want to look at it. Both countries are very much involved in the strike and militant attacks. But you're saying that Trump is definitely losing his influence. So who's taking charge in all of this? You're saying that the US is succumbing to Iran's pressures, but really and truly, where does this lie with all parties, with what Israel wants, with what Iran wants, with what Trump wants? It's quite a hard task, is what we're witnessing in real time.
Well, wait a second. I think it's not accurate to compare and say that no one is innocent. Israel, for example, yesterday very specifically targeted Iranian ballistic missile launchers equipment to prevent the firing of more missiles. Iran, on the other hand, sent millions of Israelis into bomb shelters. At this time yesterday morning, I was already here in Tel Aviv for the 3rd time in a bomb shelter. No children were going to school. Most of the population of Israel were in and out of bomb shelters. There is certainly no like for like. Israel and the United States have not targeted Iranian civilians.
Can I just pause you there? I do apologize. Yes, Tom Gross, I was going to say, I hope you are going to state that innocent civilians were targeted with this school.
Let me finish. I was about to say that. At the beginning of the war, it appears that the United States, even though they haven't admitted to it, inadvertently hit a girls' school, killing a lot of Iranian schoolgirls, which is obviously a terrible thing. And if the Americans were responsible for that, they should absolutely admit to that and pay compensation or whatever. And I'm not speaking for the American government, but it's certainly not the intent of America to kill civilians. And as far as Israel's concerned, as far as I'm aware, Israel has got very accurate intelligence and targeting, has only targeted leaders in the regime and the Revolutionary Guards and the equipment, the ballistic missile equipment. It's not firing ballistic missiles, at Tehran just randomly to potentially kill millions of people. And also, the Iranian regime has hit now, I think, 12 different Arab countries. It also hit Cyprus, a member of the European Union. They haven't hit them because, they prevented the missile landing and injuring too many people. They tried to hit people. So there's simply not a like for like. Anyway, going back to your question about deal making, I'm not a negotiator, but I can sum up how it looks, not just from Israel, but from the Gulf, from the Arab countries. It doesn't look good when yesterday Iran fired ballistic missiles at population centers, at Tel Aviv, at Jerusalem, also at Palestinians in the West Bank. It also fired at various targets in Gulf Arab countries. Israel very specifically hit back at the missile launchers to prevent further missiles. It didn't hit any civilian targets. And Trump comes in like he's some kind of football referee, like it's a soccer game, as though he's the daddy in the room, and says, okay, everyone, let's, call things off. That's fine. But, the problem is at the end, he's left the Iranian regime feeling emboldened compared to yesterday, and he's left US allies like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Israel feeling weaker, and the fear is Trump is so desperate to get a deal partly to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, that he's going to release billions of dollars to the Iranian regime, which we know from past record they will give to revive Hezbollah and Hamas, thereby...
Mr. Gross, can I just come in there? Sorry, thank you for explaining that. I don't have a lot of time, but I just need to ask you another very quick question. Do you think the US and Israel, obviously it's a joint attack that happened in February, did they underestimate how Iran was going to respond in all of this? Because it doesn't seem that the US is prepared for a very long, extended war. They expected this to be over quite quickly, but we're still here in the 100th day. How is the US and Israel coming together to put a stop to all of this and to get out what they've actually planned when it first struck Iran?
Well, you have to separate the US and Israel. What happened is that Trump, who doesn't have a lot of patience and likes things being done quickly, called a premature ceasefire. My own view about war is if you're going to fight a war, then you better win it. What you don't want to do is start a war, stop halfway through, leaving your enemy, as the Iranian regime is, feeling more embittered, more emboldened, and feeling like the victors, because the Iranian regime only has to survive to in effect feel it's won. And to remind you, there's a difference between Trump, for all his faults, is a democratically elected leader, as is Netanyahu. The Iranian regime, as far as we can possibly tell, does not have more than about 15% support among the Iranian population. So it doesn't necessarily represent the Iranian people. In fact, we see Iranians in videos, smuggled out, cheering for Netanyahu and for Israel inside Iran because they want to be liberated.
That's still very much disputed. I understand what you're saying, but 100%. And I think
it's not disputed. They are. Look at the channels, the Iranian opposition channels, like Minoto, that has 19 million followers just on Instagram, 20% of the Iranian population. Look at the comments. Look at Iran International. I don't think it's disputed. Look at the millions who took to the streets in January, in spite of the risk of getting shot.
In that sense, Mr. Gross, in that sense that you've mentioned that Trump is losing patience, that he's folding into Iran's kind of grip and aim. Israel is a very key ally in all of this, especially the reason why they decided to do a joint attack from both sides. Therefore, Benjamin Netanyahu is a key advisor to the US as to how to go about this. Do you think who has the strong arm here? Because you're saying that, Trump is losing patience, but really and truly, isn't he taking also key advice from Benjamin Netanyahu as how to go about this military source of action? And we are still here even to this day with no agreement at the end. And Iran is still in its particular position, which Trump keeps saying that they shouldn't have any nuclear weapons, but things have not changed. What will bring the change then?
Okay, so it's true that there's very close coordination politically, militarily, and this was a very coordinated action at the beginning from February 28. But then the politics diverges because the interests are different. The Israeli population, for example, the north of Israel, still can't go back to their homes. Even today, the only kids that go to school are schools with fortified bomb shelters. So any leader of Israel, whether Netanyahu or anyone else, wants their children to be able to go to school and doesn't want missiles raining down. And even last night, there were infiltrations by the Houthis, which are an Iranian proxy from Yemen. There were missiles fired from there on the south of Israel and from Hezbollah on the north. And because Donald Trump ordered, because he's calling the shots, Israel and Netanyahu not to respond, Israel didn't respond. But Netanyahu is under a lot of political pressure. There are elections coming up. He's on pressure from both left and right in Israel, who say Israel is not a vassal state. It shouldn't just take orders from the United States. And which other country will just sit there and allow itself to be bombed all the time? That's not to say Israel should foolishly respond, but there are divergences of interest. Trump, he has the World Cup starting, he has the 250th celebrations of the United States, he has midterms. He just wants to wrap it up, declare victory, whether or not there's really victory, and kick the can down the road. The Iranian regime will wait until Trump leaves office in 2 years. They'll still be in power, and they'll still wish to.
Well, then, Mr. Gross, thank you so much for that, because that's very interesting. Then, in that sense, this should have never have happened. in that sense, nothing should have started, because if you're not going to end in a better position, if you're not going to end in a better position where you've been able to overthrow a government, make sure they no longer take uranium as a nuclear program, but you're saying, Trump wants to end it and should show that he has victory very quickly.
It depends look, we have to wait and see. Maybe Trump, he claims to be an amazing deal maker. Maybe he will get a fantastic deal that will make the Iranian regime liberalize and be more peaceful to its Arab neighbors, everybody else. Maybe. But right now, as of today, it doesn't look that optimistic.
Right.
And I would agree with you that this war will not have been a success for America and for Israel. But I'd only say I don't think this is Israel's decision. It is Trump who is, to answer your previous question, who is in control here, not Netanyahu.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Gross, for your comments and insight into this story. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Right, we now move over to another war in Europe, the war in Ukraine, because that continues to bring new attacks, diplomatic signals and pressure on Russia's economy. In Zaporizhzhia, a drone strike has hit a civilian area, while Kyiv and its European partners are looking for new ways to raise costs of Moscow's war.
A Russian drone attack on Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhzhia has killed 2 people and wounded 23 others, according to regional governor Ivan Fedorov. The strike hit near a bus station, damaging vehicles, shops and nearby structures. Forensic teams worked at the scene, where authorities also recovered a damaged object believed to be part of a drone. The attack came as Ukraine intensified strikes on oil facilities in Russia and Russian-occupied Crimea, part of Kiev's campaign to raise the economic cost of Moscow's war. Russian authorities have reported fuel supply problems in several southern regions following the strikes. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov acknowledged certain problems, but said measures were being taken, while blaming panic buying. Diplomatic contacts also remain on the agenda. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Roman Abramovich had acted as a go-between for messages between Kiev and Moscow. At the same time, the European Union is preparing a new round of sanctions against Russia. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the proposed measures include 80 new listings targeting Russia's military-industrial complex, human rights violators and propagandists.
Now over to East Asia, and a powerful earthquake has left a trail of destruction across the southern Philippines, disrupting schools, transport and daily life for thousands. Rescue teams are racing to assess the full scale of the disaster as communities begin the recovery effort.
Rescue and recovery operations are continuing in the southern Philippines after a powerful earthquake struck off the coast of Sarangani province, killing at least 37 people and injuring more than 100 others. The magnitude 7.8 quake triggered landslides, damaged buildings and disrupted transport links across parts of Mindanao, with General Santos among the worst affected areas. Homes were left tilted and buildings suffered collapsed walls and roofs as emergency crews continued searching for missing people. Authorities say the victims were killed by falling debris, structural collapses and landslides caused by the strong shaking. The earthquake struck shortly after schools reopened following the summer break, affecting thousands of educational facilities across several regions. In some areas, students and teachers were forced to evacuate classrooms as the tremor hit. Transport and public services were also disrupted. Operations at General Santos International Airport were temporarily suspended for safety inspections, while several domestic flights were cancelled. The offshore quake prompted tsunami warnings in the Philippines, Japan and Indonesia. Although tsunami waves were recorded, officials said they were too small to cause significant damage, and all warnings have since been lifted. Tremors were felt across large parts of the southern Philippines and in neighbouring Indonesia, highlighting the regional impact of one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the country in recent years. The disaster comes less than a year after a series of deadly earthquakes struck the Philippines, underscoring the country's vulnerability to seismic activity along the Pacific Ring of Fire.
Now over to the continent of Africa, and the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa has reached 563 confirmed cases and 90 deaths in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighbouring Uganda, Africa CDC data showed on Monday. Now the DRC has reported 544 cases and 88 deaths, while Uganda has confirmed 19 infections and 2 deaths. The World Health Organization said the outbreak is spreading rapidly in the DRC and has crossed into Uganda. The World Health Organization is urging countries in the region to review border restrictions.
No need for this blanket travel restrictions, and it has to be lifted. Because a few countries, by the way, who have done that, so I hope they will reconsider. And Ebola needs contact, and it's not like COVID. So with basic precautions, many countries can prevent a case from coming, or they can manage it as soon as possible.
Businesses in Mexico City's historic center say ongoing protests are reducing trade and foot traffic just days before the 2026 FIFA World Cup opener. Members of the CNTE Teachers Union have maintained road blockades demanding higher wages, pension reforms and greater government attention to social issues. The camp is located close to an area being prepared for the World Cup fan festival ahead of Thursday's opening match. President Claudia Sheinbaum says her government will not repress protesters and expects World Cup events in the Mexican capital to proceed peacefully. Over to Europe now, and war, migration, AI and the Church's own reckoning with abuse is what was discussed during a closely watched visit to Spain by Pope Leo XIV, tackling a range of issues that are shaping both global politics and his vision for the future of the Catholic Church. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Pope Leo XIV delivered one of the strongest political messages of his young papacy during a landmark visit to Spain. As the first pope ever to address Madrid's parliament, he warned that the world is facing a profound spiritual and cultural crisis. Leo pointed to escalating conflicts, growing political polarization, and what he described as a widespread disregard for human rights. The speech came amid renewed tensions in the Middle East and ongoing conflicts around the world. The Pope argued that military buildups and increased defense spending cannot deliver lasting peace, saying that while weapons may impose a temporary silence, they can't create genuine reconciliation. Migration was also a central theme. Leo praised efforts to support migrants and urged governments to protect the dignity of those forced to flee conflict and poverty. He said it was essential to offer safe and legal pathways, a respectful welcome, and real possibilities for integration. Lawmakers responded with a 7-minute standing ovation. Now, the Pope also confronted one of the Catholic Church's most painful issues, clerical sexual abuse. Speaking to Spanish bishops, Leo said that the Church must respond with listening, truth, justice, and reparation, and demonstrate a determined commitment to safeguarding children and vulnerable people. Later, he met privately with 6 abuse survivors, although some victim groups criticized the process and said not all survivors were represented. Beyond war and migration, the Pope is increasingly making artificial intelligence a defining issue of his papacy. In recent weeks, he warned that AI must serve humanity, not replace it. His message from Madrid was clear. A more powerful world does not automatically become a better one. The real test is whether that power actually serves the people. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now to the World Cup, and if you really want to do it big and you have, well, maybe $1 million to hand, this thing could be for you. Well, it's a luxury hotel in New York which is offering its guests with a penthouse experience to watch the World Cup in style. It's a 4-night package scheduled around the final game on the 19th of July and includes a 24/7 butler, a private gym, helicopter and limousine rides to and from the games. Now, if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe him, who has decided to put this all together for that special guest.
So this is a study. So once you pass the piano, maybe play some tunes, we come to the study. So if you have to take some calls, but no work, this is where you'll meet with the butler and go through your day's activity with our concierge or guest relations department. So all those activities can be done here in the privacy of here. So we can shut all the doors here. So if someone's playing games or playing the piano, someone can then walk here. And this room is our dining room. So this is where all the culinary activities take place. We can have a private chef up here. You will have the best access to the stadium for the game. Expedited access. 6 tickets are included. 6 tickets on the field at the halfway line. You will also have your own private lounge, so you will have whatever you want in that lounge, the best of the best food, wines and champagne.
For $1 million, I mean, gosh, they've definitely thrown in a lot of things there. I don't know whether or not you're enticed, but you get to watch the finals, I mean, exactly on the grounds, plus, you know, that luxury experience. But those are the top stories for the day. Thank you for joining me on Daybreak, but make sure you stay tuned to A News as we'll provide you with further updates throughout the day. I'll be back tomorrow with your daily headlines. Take care.